The live stream is running. well, and what they're putting out about who they are as opposed to when the community is. Here and have been welcomed and are ready to stop seeing the advertisement for the program and start seeing the program. So hopefully you can see me now, can see the program. Welcome to each and every one of you, both in person, in the narthex and outside, and on Zoom. Welcome to tonight's Justice Jam Vote 2020, hosted by Lakeshore Avenue Baptist Church and by our community partners, League of Women Voters and Faith in Action East Bay. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Reverend Allison Tanner, pastor of Public Witness here at Lakeshore and convener of these Justice Jam events, which are quarterly events that we've been hosting for nearly 5 years now to inform the community on a variety of pressing social concerns, to connect these concerns with our faith and our moral values, and to equip our larger community with ways to engage in addressing the concern. And so tonight's presentation provides a timely opportunity to prepare ourselves to make informed decisions in the upcoming election. Hopefully by now you've all received your ballots in the mail. That's usually the first sign that it's time to get educated, and thanks for getting yourself here so that you can begin or continue the process. We're delighted tonight to have Elizabeth Hartka with us, Liz, and Anna Mathai, both here from League of Women Voters to share their nonpartisan, unbiased presentation on the state and local ballot initiatives. We've partnered with League of Women Voters for years. Well, I've been at the church 23 years, and they've been doing it since before I got here. So longtime partners, you are known for your commitment in providing educational resources to really prepare the public to make informed decisions. And so I'm so glad you're here tonight. First and foremost, because I want to be informed, and second, because I want to make sure that all of you get the chance to be informed as well. And we also welcome Faith in Action East Bay, a significant partner of Lakeshore, in our work to seek together the well-being of our community. For we know through Scripture that the well-being of the community is indeed the well-being of each and every one of us. Peyton Silkett, it's good to have you here, and Yuri Sadiki Torres is on the Zoom room, and Yuri has done a lot to really help plan this event. So thank you, Yuri, for that. A few logistics. I hope you had a chance to enjoy some refreshments, and as you're coming in, I hope that you got some of the resources we have available for you. There is an easy voter guide from League of Women Voters, which lists all the propositions. So when we go through the state propositions, you can be looking and even writing down comments on here. There's also a League of Women Voters easy voter guide for the Oakland election. So all the measures in Oakland you'll find in this larger one, and if you're on Zoom, both of these will be shared in the chat. Third document, Faith in Action East Bay, also has a list of measures where they're responding to the measures from their own faith perspective. So make sure you have one of these when we're going through the measures as well. And then in addition to these resources in the narthex are some voter recommendations from California Council of Churches and some information about other voter events that Faith in Action will be doing. As we prepare to call up the League of Women Voters, I want to offer just a few pastoral remarks to frame our time together. The first is I want to remind us that voting, for those of us who have the right to vote, voting is not just a right, but it's a responsibility. It's a responsibility, it's a collective responsibility because we owe to one another and to the common good the responsibility of making an informed vote. It's a moral responsibility because our vote helps shape the culture, helps shape our economy, helps shape the political and social environment of the community. And as a person of faith, I would argue that voting is a sacred responsibility. That voting as a sacred responsibility calls us to think with our whole beings, not just narrowly with our minds, but with our hearts as well, and not just from a perspective of our pocketbooks, but from the perspective of what will allow our community to thrive. Voting is a responsibility to live out our values. So if you value justice, vote for candidates and politicians, policies that promote equality in our communities, seek to right injustices and heal past harms. If you value dignity for all human beings, vote for candidates and policies that ensure humane practices and consideration of all persons affected by decisions. If you value community, vote to seek the health and happiness of those most vulnerable in the community, knowing that our community can only truly thrive when all its residents thrive. And finally, if you value democracy. Democracy, in which it has been abundantly clear in the past few years, can be threatened, can be retracted, must be fought for. If you value democracy, then enact it, protect it, and advocate for it. And finally, I just want to make the point that even though this is a midterm election, much is at stake. For on the ballot, you will find items that directly affect the lives of women of childbearing age and their loved ones, children and their families, young people and their futures, people with addictions, people with medical needs, people who don't have full citizenship rights, renters, landlords, people seeking access to affordable housing, and all who benefit from Oakland's infrastructure, in addition to items such as funding sources, tax considerations, and climate concerns. What's on the ballot affects us all. The last thing I want to say is that because democracy must be enacted, protected, and advocated for, I encourage you to not only get informed, but contact those in your community who might need this information as well. Tonight's event will be recorded and available to share, as will all of the resources in the narthex and being shared on Zoom. Finally, there will be a time for Q&A during the presentations, and if you're on Zoom and you have a question, simply write it in the chat, and the Zoom host will make sure that I get it. If you're here and have a question, we have different note cards that you can write your question on, and Peyton will be happy to collect those throughout the program. Without further ado, let me call up Liz from League of Women Voters to begin telling us about the California propositions.
Oh, good evening, everyone, and thank you very much, Reverend Allison, for that wonderful introduction. My name is Liz Hardka, and I'm here from the League of Women Voters. Thank you so much for inviting the League to come and speak to you about the ballots and measures on the November ballot. So the League of Women Voters is a grassroots, nonpartisan organization of women and men. Nonpartisan means we never support or oppose political candidates or parties. And the League has two branches, like two branches of a tree. So Anna, my colleague Anna, and I are here to represent the voter education branch, which is to inform voters about what's on the ballot and sort of try and educate you about what's going on there. The advocacy branch is the other branch. That branch does research and it looks into measures and makes recommendations. Now, we're not going to talk, we're going to try and well, we will confine our conversation tonight to the nonpartisan educational function, but if you are interested in the recommendations of the league, then I would invite you to go to our website where they're published, and you can find them there. So let's talk a little bit about how to go about evaluating these measures. One question you'll have is, well, an obvious one, what is the measure, and why do we have this measure? How much is it going to cost, if there is a cost associated with it, and how will it be paid for? Is it well written, or is it going to cause more problems than it solves? Who's funding the campaign for this proposition or measure, and who's funding the campaign against? Who's really behind it? And which side do you agree with? At the end of the day, do you come down supporting the measure or opposing it? And I just want to assure you the voting is not a test. You don't have to it's okay to leave blanks on the ballot. You should vote for what you care about and what's important to you. So take that with a grain of salt. Now, we have a lot of material to cover this evening, and I am going to hold off on that funding slide about who's backing the measure, but if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or ask me afterwards. I'd be happy to talk more about them. I will be talking about the 7 state propositions that are on the ballot, and there's one county measure, Measure D, and then then we'll have Q&A, then I'll turn the lectern over to Anna, and she will talk about the City of Oakland local measures. So how does a proposition get onto the ballot? Well, there's a couple different ways. The legislature can place a proposition on the ballot, and that's what happened with Proposition 1, which we'll get to in a couple seconds. Any California voter can put an initiative on the ballot. They just have to get enough votes to do that. And most of the propositions I'll be talking about are initiatives. There's one referendum, which is also voter initiated. That's Proposition 31. We'll get to that at the end of my presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to talk about Proposition 1 first. That's the reproductive freedom proposition. You can follow along in your Easy Voter Guide. As the Reverend suggested, I'll go through the propositions in that order. So the background for this is, in June 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court ended the federal constitutional right to abortion. There's concern that the right to contraception may be under similar threat. Now, abortion is legal under California state law, and Proposition 1 does not change the law. What Proposition 1 proposes to do is to put the right to choose an abortion or contraception in the California Constitution. That's the highest law in our state. This will make it harder for future governments to limit reproductive freedoms, and it will make it harder for courts to overturn the case law that's associated with this. Now, if you believe that reproductive freedom is a fundamental right, you would tend to support this proposition. Or if you believe that reproductive medical decisions should be made between a patient and their caregiver, then you would tend to support Proposition 1. If, on the other hand, you don't support reproductive freedom as a right, then you would oppose Prop 1. Also, you could argue women already have the right to choose under California state law. What do we need? Why do we need to put this on the Constitution? And that's a valid reason to oppose it as well. So a yes vote on Prop 1 means the California Constitution will explicitly include rights to reproductive freedom. A no vote means no change to the Constitution at all. Okay? The next two propositions, 26 and 27, have to do with gambling. So the background in Proposition 26, it allows in-person sports betting and also in-person roulette and dice. So I'll get through those. Once I give you the background, which is that if you want to gamble legally in the state of California, you basically have 4 options. You can buy a lottery ticket. You can go to a card room and play a card game like poker. You can go to a racetrack and bet on a horse race, or you can go to a tribal casino and gamble there. What Proposition 26 proposes to do is to allow in-person sports betting at casinos and racetracks. And it also allows the tribal casinos to offer roulette and dice games, which they can't do under the law now. So that's what's being proposed here. The fiscal effects, this is expected to increase state revenues to the tune of tens of millions of dollars annually. And this is over and above the costs that would be required to set this process up and enforce the law. So that's the revenue that we would gain. Now, reasons to support Proposition 26 might include: it helps Indian tribes provide vital services to their members. They could generate more revenue with more gambling, and they could provide more services to their members. And if you're concerned about underage sports betting, this would be in person. So in theory, it'd be easier to enforce the age limits on this activity. On the other hand, if you think the tribal casinos have a big enough monopoly on gambling in the state of California, you would tend to oppose this proposition. Or if you're concerned about gambling addiction and the public health and public safety issues that would arise from that, then you would oppose Proposition 26. So a yes vote means more in-person gambling options, roulette dice, sports betting. A no vote on Prop 26 means gambling's limited to the current options available today. Okay, Proposition 27 is the second gambling proposition. This one allows online sports betting. The background is that most sports betting is not allowed in the state of California. As I mentioned, the only sport you can bet on is horse racing. So what Proposition 27 would do is it would legalize online betting in sports, like professional sports like baseball, football, that sort of thing, as well as some non-athletic events like the Oscars or the award ceremonies and current events. There would be no betting allowed on elections or in youth sports, and this would be the large gambling companies would work in conjunction with the tribes to set this up in the state of California. Fiscal effects: this is expected to increase state revenues to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. This is a big business. So the state gets the first cut, and I believe it's 10% of every dollar that you spend on online gambling goes to the state. The state takes its cut to enforce the laws and to set up the structure to monitor this new activity. And then of the remainder, 85% of that would go to combating homelessness and treating mental illness and gambling addiction. And the remainder would be shared with tribes, smaller tribes in California that don't engage in this online gambling process. So reasons to support: if you believe that we need more money to combat homelessness and to treat mental illness and addictions in the state of California, then you would tend to support Proposition 27. You might also support it because this probably will bring in more money to the smaller tribes that can't support a casino or any other sorts of gambling. Reasons to oppose: well, again, this is going to make gambling a lot more accessible. Anybody with a smartphone can gamble, so any day, any time, it's supposed to happen within the state of California, but it's a game changer. So there's that, and the gambling addictions might increase and so on and so forth. This would also, the way the proposition is written, it benefits the larger gaming corporations because written into the proposition is a requirement that the corporation has to be licensed in at least 10 states outside of California. So this basically wipes out the smaller gambling companies. So it's a little bit of an unfair playing field, no pun intended. So a yes vote means allow online sports betting, a yes vote on 27, and a no vote means do not allow online sports betting. Moving on to Proposition 28, this is the proposition that would give more funding for arts and music education in schools. So the background: the state is required to spend roughly 40% of the general fund on K through 14 education each year in California, so that's K through 12, plus 2 years of community college. There is no guaranteed funding for arts or music education in K through 12 public schools. If Proposition 28 is passed, it would guarantee additional funding for arts and music education, which would be 1% of the previous year's total budget for education. That would be earmarked for arts and music. It would be, more money would go to bigger schools, but proportionally more money would go to schools with higher numbers of lower income students. So again, it's trying to level the playing field that way. Fiscal effects: it's going to increase state expenses, about $1 billion each year. And reasons to support Proposition 28, if you believe that arts and music education improves students' personal and academic life. And keep in mind, only 1 in 5 schools has a dedicated teacher for arts programs currently. That means the English teacher gets to teach art, or vice versa. Reasons to oppose Proposition 28 mainly have to do with funding. Having that set aside for arts and music education would limit the funds available for other educational spending. So it limits the flexibility to spend on the areas of highest need. It would be earmarked for arts and music education. So a yes vote means guaranteed funding for arts and music education in K through 12 public schools. A no vote means no change to current funding. Proposition 29, more regulations for kidney dialysis clinics. If this sounds familiar, it's because similar propositions have been on the ballot in the past couple years. Proposition 8 in 2018 and Proposition 23 in 2020. Neither one of those propositions passed. This one, well, I'll tell you what is included in the new one. The staffing is different. Prop 29 would require that an MD, a nurse practitioner, or a physician's assistant be at the dialysis clinic during treatment hours, sort of in a supervisory role. Currently, these dialysis clinics have a registered nurse or an RN serving that function. They're specially trained in dialysis, but that's the way it's set up now. Under Prop 29, all clinics would be required to report dialysis-related infections to the state. Currently, they just have to report them to Medicare. The clinic would have to disclose to its patients who owns the clinic. They would have to request, the dialysis clinics would have to request permission from the state to either reduce services or close. And they would be required to treat all comers regardless of payment type. And most people, their dialysis is paid either through private insurance, Medicare, or Medi-Cal. So that's what's being proposed under Prop 29. The fiscal effects, well, it's estimated that the costs to the clinics would increase possibly by hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that's primarily because if you're staffing at a higher level, it's going to cost more money. State and local governments could expect increases of tens of millions of dollars or more. That's because if the clinics decide they can't function under this new regime and they close, then their current patients might end up in the emergency room, which is a very expensive care setting, or in a hospital. Or if the clinics decide, okay, they want to stay in business, but they need to negotiate higher reimbursement rates from the government, then the cost gets passed along to taxpayers. So reasons to support Prop 29, if you believe that the staffing at the clinics, dialysis clinics, should be at that higher level, you would support this proposition. And if you believe that it's not fair to financially discriminate among your patients, then you would support Prop 29. If, on the other hand, you're worried about the increased costs that this prop would bring, or dialysis clinics closing, or if you're worried about the additional requirements in terms of staffing, so you would have to have an MD, a nurse practitioner, a physician's assistant, move to the dialysis clinic from somewhere else, so those somewhere else would be losing staff as they move to these clinics, and so you might get shortages of that sort. So these are all things to keep in mind. A yes vote on Prop 29 means more regulations on kidney dialysis clinics. A no vote means keep the current regulations. Prop 30 is the millionaire's tax. The background to this is California has very ambitious goals for getting zero emission vehicles, or ZEVs, onto the roads. We have a goal of 25% of all new cars in the state would be these zero-emission vehicles by the year 2026. That's just in 4 years. And by the year 2035, 100% of all new cars sold in the state would be zero-emission vehicles. Ride-sharing companies like Uber and Lyft would be required to have 90% of their drivers driving these zero-emission vehicles by the year 2030. And federal and state governments both have committed millions of billions of dollars to speed up the zero-emission vehicle adoption. The money will be raised by a tax on millionaires, which I'll get to in a moment, but that increase in the tax rate, 45% of the revenue that's generated will be used to promote the purchase of these zero-emission vehicles, either through rebates or incentives. 35% would increase the availability of charging stations throughout the state, and 20% would be used to fund wildfire suppression and prevention measures. The fiscal effects, well, it would increase the income tax by 1.75% on individual incomes over $2 million. So the first $2 million is the same tax structure. It's the amount over $2 million that would be taxed at a higher rate. This is expected to generate $3.5 to $5 billion a year. 2.4 to 4 billion of that would go to ZEV funding, and approximately 700 million to up to $1 billion would go for wildfire response activities. So if you're worried about climate change and you believe that greenhouse gas emissions from transportation, that's all cars, trucks, everything that's on the road that has an internal combustion engine, is the largest contributor to climate change, then you would probably support Prop 30. Also, Prop 30 makes zero-emission vehicles more affordable, and if you're in favor of that, you would support this proposition. Reasons to oppose, well, state and federal governments are already spending a lot of money to speed up the adoption of ZEVs. There's a possibility that some high earners might leave the state because they'd be taxed at they've had one of the highest income tax rates in the nation at that point, if this passes. And it locks in money raised by the tax increase to just that bucket that would fund the ZEV adoption and wildfire suppression. So the legislature couldn't touch that money and use it for anything else. So there's that. So a yes vote on Prop 30 means yes, new tax on incomes over $2 million to increase electric vehicle adoption and fight wildfires. No vote on Prop 30 means no change to the current tax rate. Now, Prop 31, this is the last state proposition that I'll talk to you about. And the background to this is, in the year 2020, the legislature passed a law that bans stores and vending machines from selling flavored tobacco products. This is the candy-flavored tobacco, fruit-flavored, menthol cigarettes, that sort of thing. That law was challenged and is now on hold. So a referendum was introduced. That Prop 31 is a referendum. The law will only go into effect if Proposition 31 passes. So the fiscal effect, if this passes, this ban on flavored tobacco products, if it passes, we can expect reduced revenues from tens of millions of dollars to as much as $100 million. And that's because all those products that are now being sold and taxed would no longer be being sold, so we would lose that tax revenue. Now, there are reasons to support Prop 31, one of which is most of the people who use these canned flavored tobacco products are young people. I think some estimates are 45% of them are under, maybe underage, I don't know, they're younger. It's older people who smoke cigarettes. So if you believe that these products could be used to lure kids into a lifelong addiction to nicotine, you might support this proposition. Also, if you believe that using flavored tobacco products makes it harder to quit smoking, you would support this proposition. Reasons to oppose. Well, it's already illegal to sell cigarettes or nicotine to anyone who's under the age of 21, so why do we need a prohibition on these products? That's one argument against it. And it's also possible that if the products are banned, people might smuggle them into the state and there would be potential increase in crime, and that would be a bad thing. So a yes vote on Proposition 31 means yes, ban the sale of flavored tobacco products. A no vote means do not allow that law to go into effect. The sale of flavored tobacco products would continue in the state. And now I've come to the last measure. This is Measure D. And this is the Alameda County measure. Now the background is, there was Measure D, it's called Agriculture and Open Space Lands, and this was passed to protect open space and the environment in Alameda County. So it was originally passed in the year 2000, and part of the law set ratios for, so if you have land that's classified as agricultural land, if you have a farm or a horse farm or a winery or something like that, you can only build buildings that are a certain bigness. I don't know. They can only, there's a ratio between, I mean, you can't build the biggest building you want. It can only be a certain size, and there's a ratio of the square footage of that building to the entire land mass, and that's fixed in the law. So there was a review done in 2020, a couple years ago, and now the proposal in front of voters, in front of you all, is to change the ratio for agricultural buildings and for equestrian areas relative to the land to allow expansion. So this means you could build a bigger building on your winery land, and there's still a cap, there's still a limit. It can't be as big as you want it. And this would presumably generate more commerce, more income, more tax revenues. So that's what's on the ballot. This was placed on the ballot by the Alameda County Board of Supervisors, who they had over 30 public meetings to introduce this measure to the public to get their buy-in. It's supported by the Greenbelt Alliance, which is an environmental organization. There is no official opposition to Measure D, but that doesn't mean there aren't opponents. Some people who are opposed to Measure D believe that it would enable a handful of big wineries to triple in size, and it would weaken Alameda County's environmental protections. But people who support it say, well, it would allow more space for covered corrals at equestrian facilities, or performance areas, so you could have bigger horse shows, that sort of thing. And it would allow expanded areas for processing, for retail at wineries and olive presses, and that serve the public. So there's that. So if you're in favor of more production and more commerce, you would tend to support Measure D, but if you're worried about the environmental effects, you would tend to oppose it. And I think I'm just about out of time, and we're ready for questions.
Sounds like you're just about out of material, too, so good timing. If you have questions, remember to use the chat feature if you're on Zoom, or Peyton will be picking up if you write anything on the little note cards we handed out or that are on the sides of the pews. Go ahead and take one. First question comes from Zoom about Proposition 29. Is there any evidence that people who need dialysis are being discriminated against?
I don't know. Anna, do you know?
I think just a flavor of this proposition overall, and just given this year and the past years, is it is kind of a labor dispute between a large union that's looking to unionize the dialysis workers, SEIU, and the big dialysis companies. There are concerns overall, just given the number of people who undergo dialysis, about whether the clinics are running in the best way possible or not. But this is the measure that's on there, and I'm afraid you have to make a judgment as to whether this is the measure to make improvements or not. But sorry, I don't know the answer to that.
Reverend Allison, I'd be happy to look into that and email you. I just don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, yes, if you could find, I do know the person who asked the question, and I can make sure that your answer gets to them if you would. Thank you.
I'd be happy to.
Any other questions? If, the question was, would requiring the advanced medical professionals require some places to close?
It depends on how they're being. Okay, so if you have a registered nurse who's supervising the clinic now, and you replace that registered nurse with an MD, and of course it depends on what level the MD is, if they're right out of medical school or if they have years and years of experience and they can command a higher salary. So there's a lot of kind of what ifs in this. But the assumption is, say you assume somebody's right in the middle of the scale, they're probably going to ask for more money to supervise this clinic. The supporters or the opponents of the proposition say you don't need somebody at that higher level to do the supervision. The RNs can do it just fine. They're specially trained in dialysis, so why would you need all this extra expertise? So, does that answer your question? Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm sure their budgets are set up to, it's based on an RN salary, and then if they would have to rebudget to pay more money to that administrator, then they would say, we need to increase, it's going to cost us more to do this, to run the clinic. And that cost is either going to come out of their profit margin, or it's going to get passed along to their customers, so.
Okay, we have another, is this a same proposition?
It's being opposed by, there's two big dialysis corporations in California. It's DaVita and Fresenius Medical, and they're opposing Prop 29. Yeah, it's the union that's pushing Prop 29. And the union, I believe, has been behind Prop 8 and the other prop. It's been going on for several years.
Okay, we have, okay, hold on. People can't hear you on Zoom if you're,
Sorry, I just said they can charge more to the government entities or other private industry.
Or the private insurers, yes, I would agree with that, yes.
and which unions that you were just referring to?
I'm sorry?
Which unions you were referring to?
Service Employees International United, healthcare workers, or SEIU, as they're often called.
Okay, there are a few questions from Zoom. Is there an indication that gambling will increase if the proposition on it passes, or is there an indication that the impact of passage would just be to redirect gambling funds towards solving homelessness?
So this is just Prop 27?
This is,
Well, okay, I mean, the assumption is that if there are more avenues for gambling, more people are going to gamble. And I think that's a pretty safe assumption. There'll be at least some increase in gambling. So there'll be increased revenues. And the projections that I shared with you came from the state legislative and analyst's office, and they've been in this business for years. They have previous gambling experience to jump off from. And there are, they've made all these estimates or projections about how much money they'll make from the gambling, how much will be available for homelessness. But I believe it's the case that the state is already spending billions of dollars fighting homelessness. And remember, the projection for Prop 27, would be hundreds of millions of dollars, which would need to be shared with, these other mental health and gambling addiction, and then the state gets its cut. So, does that answer the question? I hope.
sufficiently for me.
Okay.
And then this looks like a follow-up on the kidney dialysis, which you may have to research. As long as you're going to research it, get this question in too. Is there a history of untoward incidents in dialysis centers? Why would proponents want this?
Okay, I'm gonna tell you something that's based on my own personal experience. When I worked for a company that tried to set up its own dialysis clinics, they found out it's a lot harder to do than you think, because it's I don't want to say it's a dangerous procedure, but there are risks associated with dialysis. So they decided to back out and to let the companies that are already doing it, like DaVita and Fresenius, continue on with that business. Now, is it too risky to be safe? I don't think so, but I don't have the numbers. I don't actually know what the threshold would be for shutting places down. But I do know a lot of the funding comes from Medicare, and Medicare is monitoring the infections that come out of these clinics, and they would step in if something bad were going on. So I hope that provides some reassurance to folks.
All right, thank you. And there's actually quite a lively discussion on dialysis in the chat with a few articles shared. And if you have registered for tonight's event, we will follow up with additional resources, and I will include the information that was shared on chat. And if you did not register but want that information, just make sure that I have your name and email or place it in the chat. And again, we'll follow up with all of our voter action recommendations and all the materials that were sent tonight. So I think with that, let's go ahead and transition. Thank you so much, Liz. Very,
you.
very informational. And welcome, Anna.
All right. So we do have this handout on the Oakland City measures, and if you start from the back, it's almost easier. It's page number 9 is where they start. There is quite a bit of text, so I'm not suggesting necessarily that you read it now, but this is a takeaway, again, that will help you. So similar to how California propositions get on the ballot, how do Oakland measures get on the ballot? So there's 3 different ways again. The City Council can place a measure on the ballot, and we've got 10 measures in all, and 8 of them have come from the City Council. OUSD, which is the Oakland Unified School District, can place a measure, and we've got 1 measure H from OUSD. And citizens can also place an initiative on the ballot, and we've got 1 citizen measure. So let's just go ahead and start going through them. So the first one is Measure H. So this is from OUSD, and it's called the College and Career Fund. It is a parcel tax. So a parcel tax is one of 2 ways that we pay, one of 2 things that we pay for from our property taxes, anybody who's a residential or a commercial property owner in Oakland. And this requires a 2/3 majority vote to pass. So what's some of the background here? In 2014, there was a similar measure N, which was passed by voters. So this was an annual parcel tax to allow high school students and high schools to develop pathways to careers such as business, education, and healthcare. It also paid for integrating high school academics with career-based learning and real-world experiences. So this was back in 2014, and this measure is going to expire in 2025. So Measure H would be an extension of that measure. What Measure N did was it provided a stable source of funding, about $12 million or so in annual funding, which really helped do a number of things. I think the impact has been pretty positive, and a few results are, double-digit improvement in graduation rates for both African American and Latinx students. And overall, the graduation rates increased from 61% in 2013-2014 when the program started to 73%, so a 12% increase to just before COVID. How much will the measure cost? It will extend the parcel tax of $120 for 14 years, and that's kind of a flat $120, regardless of what your assessment on the house is. There are exemptions for seniors and low-income households, and the measure also requires an independent auditor to issue an annual report and audit. Reasons to support and oppose. So reasons to support: Measure N has been effective in improving academic metrics, providing career pathways, internship opportunities, and counseling. And no one's very happy about a parcel tax, but it's one of the few ways that we can ensure consistent funding to the program because OUSD and state funding varies. Reasons to oppose: opponents say, this is a great program, has been proven, and now future funding really should come from the OUSD budget. So you'd be voting yes to extend the annual parcel tax of $120 for the next 14 years to support this initiative in high schools. Measure Q. So this is a little different. It has to do with affordable housing authorization. And it's kind of a funky one because in California, there's a legacy that goes back to the 50s, where if a city wanted to build an affordable housing project, the city's voters had to approve the project. So it has a bit of a racist background. It is state law today. And so what this measure is doing is it's asking the voters of Oakland to authorize up to 13,000 affordable housing units in Oakland. So there's no fiscal effects, there's no money associated with this, but the idea is that if we got bond money, if we got other monies, we'd already have this authorization in place, and so the city could go ahead and build these affordable housing units. So reasons to support would be the measure would support overall, Oakland's overall housing plans, and this authorization would allow large projects to move forward without unnecessary delays. And there was no formal opposition to this measure, at least that's published. Measure R, our next one, is also fairly straightforward. This is around gender-neutral language. So the Oakland City Charter uses gender-specific words. For example, it uses fireman. The city charter also uses male and female pronouns like he and she. So what Measure R would do is it would change the city charter and replace the gender-specific words with gender-neutral words. So instead of firefighters, you would use you would say firefighters instead of firemen, and also gender-neutral pronouns like they instead of he and she. The measure is not expected to have an effect on city income or spending, but because it changes the charter, it has to be brought to all the voters. And so reasons to support would be, city workers and officials have a variety of gender identities, and so, the city charter should use words that represent all identities. And this would also bring Oakland more in line with the state of California policy, around using gender-neutral words in law and official documents. And again, this one doesn't have any formal opposition or arguments published. So the next one is Measure S, and this is around non-citizen voting, but specifically in school board elections only. So non-citizen voting, but only in school board elections. So what's the background? So currently to vote in school board elections, like everything else, Oakland residents must be US citizens, and you've got to be at least 18 years of age. Non-citizens cannot vote. And non-citizens could be, legal permanent residents, could be people with work visas, and the undocumented. So there are about 13,000 non-citizens who send their children to school in Oakland. And also some background from across the Bay. San Francisco has been doing this, allowing non-citizens to vote in school board elections since 2016. But that law is currently being reviewed by the court, so it's not entirely straightforward as to what the path is. So what would this measure do? So it would amend the charter to allow the city council to pass a law to permit non-citizen residents to vote in school board elections if they are parents, guardians, or legal caregivers of children who go to school in Oakland. And the city council would, if the measure passes, then the city council would get more into the details of the qualification and the criteria and so on and so forth. In terms of costs, there's a small amount of cost, like about $30,000 for Oakland to administer elections, but then there's a larger chunk of unspecified costs because now you're keeping track of two sets of data, right? Because you have non-citizens to vote in school boards and you have citizens who can vote in everything else. So that's a little bit murky as to exactly what it would cost. So reasons to support, again, supporters say it would enable all parents and guardians of children in Oakland to influence the school board policies. Parents and guardians, they have the most incentive to elect good school board leaders because their children are in the schools. And it would also, consider the needs of marginalized communities and encourage more participation in civic process, even if you're not a citizen. Opponents, caution that immigration laws are specific and they're quite strict. And so non-citizens could risk unintended consequences by participating in something like this. Implementation could be difficult, could be costly because you need, a separate voter registration system. And again, just given what's happening at San Francisco and the courts, the caution from opponents is Oakland should wait until the law is settled and, not rush ahead with and avoid unnecessary legal challenges and expenses. So we are now Measure T, which is a business tax. So in the measures overall, we'll have a couple of parcel taxes, we'll have a bond, and this is a tax on businesses. So all businesses, this is Measure T, all businesses in Oakland pay a business tax. Currently, businesses are classified into categories. So you've got grocers, examples, grocers, hotels, motels, manufacturing, businesses within a certain category. So for example, if you're a grocer, all grocers pay at the same rate regardless of if they're a mom and pop or if they're a very big chain. So regardless of their gross receipts, they're paying the same rate of tax, and that's considered a flat tax. Just one caveat, the tax code for rental properties and cannabis was updated recently, so Measure T does not apply to rental property or to cannabis. What Measure T would do is it would change the business tax to a progressive tax. That means when a business makes more money, it has more gross receipts, they would pay at a higher rate because they make more money. The effects are, Oakland has almost 60,000 small businesses and about 50 or so large companies. Many of the small businesses would actually get a small tax break, $100 or so, not significant, but a small break. But this is really going to affect mostly the companies with administrative headquarters that earn more than 20 million. They could be paying 2, 3, 4 times as much as what they pay right now. In terms of what this generates, the business tax overall 2020-21 generated about 105 million for Oakland's Oakland's general fund, and this measure would raise about 21 or 22 million, so it's about 20% more. So reasons to support and oppose. Other cities like San Francisco, Richmond, and San Jose have progressive tax rates. So the more your gross receipts, the higher you pay, and so supporters say, so should Oakland. Supporters also point out is, originally there were going to be multiple conflicting measures coming out of labor, the city council, and business, and they really got together, and this really reflects extensive input and compromise, and allows Oakland to raise reader revenue, and so supporters are saying, support it based on that. Opponents say, these tax hikes may cause businesses to leave Oakland or to avoid locating here in the first place. And there are a couple of cities around us, like Berkeley and Pleasanton, that have lower rates, so they make it more attractive for businesses to move there. Opponents also say, tax rates should be introduced more slowly and not all at once, really to, give time to study the impact and adjust it adjust increases and only increase taxes as much as are needed. So you are voting yes on Measure T to raise the business tax to a progressive tax, and you're voting no to keep it the way it is. And I'm sorry, we have like 10. I really apologize for rushing through. But again, this is just to give you a flavor of what's happening. You've got the materials here. We've got more materials. So there's lots more to read. And election day is still a little for November 8th, so you've got time, so no sweat. All right. So this is an infrastructure bond. So again, on our property taxes, again, as property owners, you can pay for parcel taxes or bonds. And bonds are what we do for infrastructure. So for background, in 2016, we had a Measure KK, which approved bonds for 600 million. It was for street paving, repair city facilities, and to build affordable housing. And I, for one, have noticed a lot more street paving since then. So that money has been mostly spent, but more is needed, especially for affordable housing. And so this measure was put on by the City Council, and it would approve 850 million in total, and the breakdown would be 350 million for rehab or new construction of affordable housing, so the largest chunk, 290 million for street paving, pedestrian safety, and other transportation projects, and 210 million for city facilities like library, fire, police, and parks. Again, this is all about infrastructure, about rehabbing facilities. So what effect would this have on property owners' taxes? So what's interesting is the city recently adopted a debt policy limit on city bonds. And the policy that they adopted is to limit the taxpayer's rate to 0.22%, which is about $220 for every 100,000 of assessed value. Assessed value, I think we all know, is not the same as market value. And for example, if your house was assessed at 500,000, according to this debt policy limit, the most you would pay to repay Oakland City bonds is $1,100 a year in taxes, right? So that's the limit, and what this means is the rate should not go higher, because even if this measure passes, new bonds will only be issued as old bonds are paid off, or as the tax base increases. And again, this measure has an independent audit oversight, again, by the Affordable Housing and Infrastructure Bonds Public Oversight Committee that currently oversees Measure KK. Supporters say, Measure U would provide funds to continue the work begun under KK, especially for more affordable housing. Oakland is not a young city, needs to continue to repair and upgrade its fire, police facilities, libraries, parks, recreation centers, streets, you name it. Reasons to oppose, opponents say, standards for the oversight aren't as stringent and as specific, and they have concerns about how the money would be used, and taxes are already high. And so is this really the right thing to be doing? Our next measure, V, is around tenant protections, and it's titled Just Cause for Eviction. So Oakland voters have passed many renter protections in the past 20 years, and there's sort of some criteria for those renter protections. So they apply to buildings built before 1995. They identify different tenant actions, such as failure to pay rent. So there's a set of things that are known as just causes that can trigger an eviction. Failure to pay rent is kind of an obvious one. It also gives owners the right to evict, even if the tenants aren't at fault. For example, if the owners want to occupy the units themselves, or if they want to do significant repairs, which is not compatible with somebody living there. So what Measure V would do would be to offer new protections. So more buildings would be covered. So all buildings built prior to 10 years ago. So for example, this year, if the measure passes, it would be buildings built up to 2012. As the years progress, 2023, it would be buildings built till 2013. So the measure kind of keeps pace with time as we're moving on. It would apply to more tenants. It would apply to those living in motorhomes, on residential plots, to those living in tiny homes. And there would also be new limits on the owner's right to move in or repair during the school year if the tenants are school employees or have children in school. So the reasons to support, supporters say Measure V, again, extending tenant protections will help reduce the risk of displacement for more tenants, and reducing this risk for students and employees during the school year is really important, for continuity. Supporters say in order not to discourage new construction, Measure V exempts units including ADUs, accessory development units, that have been built in the last 10 years. That same thing, the opponents say, even if you're exempting units that have been built in the last 10 years, this may still discourage new housing, and without new housing, rents for existing housing may increase. Opponents also say giving special tenant protections to school employees and families may discourage landlords from renting to them, and this measure, extending protections to those who live in motorhomes, may also discourage landlords from allowing motorhomes on their land. I am going to switch then to a couple of fair governance ones, and again, apologies, there's a lot of different topics that we sort of go through here. So this is Measure W, and this is around the Fair Elections Act. So what's the reasoning or the impetus for this? Individuals and organizations who donate to political candidates can acquire significant influence because running for public office costs a lot of money. In Oakland, like many other places, a few donors provide most of the money for campaigns. And so public campaign financing programs can reduce this big donor influence. Oakland has a small campaign funding program right now, but we're really looking to expand it with Measure W. So what's Measure W going to do? It's a new campaign funding program. One aspect is, through this program, registered voters and anybody who's actually eligible to vote could receive $425 vouchers. So you would apply for these vouchers, you would get these vouchers, and then you can donate this to candidates of your choice who are running for mayor, city auditor, city attorney, council member, or school board director. So in turn for getting this money, candidates who participate in the program would need to limit their total campaign spending and provide campaign spending reports. In addition, Measure W does a few other things. You know, the 3 highest contributors to a campaign need to be disclosed on all reports, on all materials that are supporting or opposing. It would lower the limit on donations. Right now, you know, individuals can donate up to $900 to a candidate, and Measure W would reduce that to $600. Political committees can donate up to $1,800, and Measure W would reduce that to $1,200. Measure W would also make some changes on restrictions on lobbying. So former city council members, other city officials currently are prohibited from lobbying for 1 year after they leave government service, and Measure W would increase that to 2 years. This comes at some costs. Oakland would pay about $700,000 in startup costs. It would pay about $1.6 million every year for administrative costs. It's really staff, about 4 staff members to administer the program, and then $4 million every 2 years, every election year, for vouchers, you know, to provide to the candidate campaigns. So reasons to support: it would make the elections more fair to candidates who don't have connections to large donors. Another reason supporters point out is a similar program in Seattle has run for many years, and it's worked really well there to increase candidate diversity and led to greater participation in elections from people across, you know, a range of races, ethnicities, ages, and income levels. Opponents point out that candidates who have connections to large donors may choose not to participate, so they would still have a big advantage in elections. And they also point out, you know, Oakland has a lot of problems. Measure W does cost, you know, some money. Is that an effective use of city funds, or should that be spent on other needs? Our second kind of government reform one is Measure X. And this is one I'm just going to touch on, and it is really kind of a grab bag of a number of different reforms. So it's really kind of hard to wrap your arms around, you know, one kind of thing. So let me just sort of highlight a couple of things, and then I encourage you to read the literature. So right now, you know, we've got 8 council members. 7 are directly elected from, you know, every district, and there's 1 council member at large in the Oakland City Council. Right now, there are no term limits. So council members can stay in office as long as they keep winning re-election. And what the Measure X would propose to do is limit council members to 3 consecutive terms, with the caveat that if they sit out another term, you know, they can run again. So it's kind of limited term limits. There are more rules around how many hearings it takes to place, you know, a measure on an election ballot. There are rules around ties and kind of games that council members can play, if you will, to avoid a tie. Setting salaries of council members, setting salaries of the city auditor, city attorney, the number of staff. Again, the thinking behind this measure was to increase the effectiveness of the city auditor's office, and so the measure writes in the number of specific numbers of staff that the city auditor's office has to have. So again, it's kind of a grab bag of things. And so, you know, supporters say it addresses some of the problems of Oakland government operation. They're not claiming it addresses everything, but something's better than nothing. Restricting political advocacy, because one of the things, again, is they would not allow anyone running or anyone in the office of city auditor or attorney to support a candidate. So they say restricting political advocacy may make the offices of city auditor and attorney more effective, and increasing the salaries of those 2 offices would also make you know, the office more attractive and help Oakland attract and retain more qualified candidates. Opponents say, you know, this is not comprehensive, this is really piecemeal, fixes some issues, doesn't do enough. Bundling different reforms together doesn't give the voters the option to vote for some reforms, not for others. And again, they point out that term limits are not strict, because your council member could sit out a term and then they could run for election again. So that's Measure W, which is government reform in many different steps. All right, so now we are down to our final one, Measure Y, and this is a parcel tax for the zoo. And this is different from all the other measures that you've seen, because it's actually brought by some voters. It's actually an initiative, and because it's an initiative, it's interesting, it actually only requires a simple majority, 50%. So what's the background here? So the Oakland Zoo is owned by the city, but it's managed by a nonprofit. Its annual budget is about $24 million. And through COVID, the most of the revenue that they were getting is through entry fees, food, souvenirs, provide the majority of the zoo's operating revenues, and they've all been impacted by COVID. The zoo does receive about 8% of its budget from the city, from the transit occupancy tax, from Alameda County and East Bay Regional Parks, but 92% is from everything else. Oakland Zoo has almost 1 million visitors every year, and about 15% are from Oakland, about 65% are from Alameda County, and the rest are from outside, the county also. So what's the measure proposing? So the measure is proposing a new 20-year parcel tax starting in 2023, which would raise about $12 million in additional funding for the zoo's operations, staffing, maintenance, and capital improvements. And the measure would require that the current public funding that Oakland and Alameda County are providing stay at the same level. What would it cost us? Residential property owners would pay $68 annually, and owners of multi-unit residential parcels would pay $68 for each unit. There are certain exemptions for low-income households and seniors, and non-residential properties are taxed based on the size of their property and frontage and some other calculations. All assessment would be subject to annual cost of living adjustments, and the measure would require an independent annual audit and an annual report from the Office of City Auditor. Reasons to support. The zoo is a great city asset. It's a great local asset. It needs funding to keep its budget stable and to expand operations. Parcel tax funding would allow the zoo to expand educational programs and perhaps offer free passes. And if they did that, these efforts would benefit Oakland schools, nonprofits, low-income residents, and seniors. Those who oppose it, say the measure does not have enough financial accountability because it doesn't specify how much revenue should be spent on each of the zoo's different needs. There just isn't that level of detail in the measure. And they also say, opponents also say, this does not require, it does not mandate that the zoo provides specific benefits to Oakland residents. And so opponents say this is not fair because only Oakland property owners are paying this tax, and Oakland property owners are 15% of the visitors, while 85% of the visitors live outside of Oakland, and so that isn't fair. So that was just a lot to go through. Again, I just want to point out you've got a hard copy. Our league website is lwooakland.org, so we've got a wealth of information there. We've also got information, even though at our pros and cons we don't talk about candidates and we don't endorse candidates, we have a number of recordings of candidate forums across the city, and we also have recommendations on ballot measures. So I'll pause there for questions.
Okay. Regarding Measure X, are the Oakland City Attorney and City Auditor underpaid compared to surrounding officials?
I am not sure if they are underpaid, but I think there is concern that we keep pace with market trends, and that's what this measure would write in.
Okay. With respect to the proposal of non-citizens voting on school issues, if they have children in Oakland Public Schools, which sounds like a good goal, how would it be determined who can vote on this issue, and how would the voters of such persons be limited to that issue? This is not intended as a criticism of non-citizen voters, but as a question of how it can work mechanically so as to facilitate and encourage non-citizen voting on issues impacting their children.
Right. So what this measure, what we are voting on is whether or not to allow the city council to pursue this, right? So if we vote yes, then the city council has the authorization to go out and basically investigate and set up the mechanism for all of this. But it is complicated because I think one of the things, for example, is to keep, for example, two voter registration databases, one for citizens who can vote in everything, and one for non-citizens. So it is complicated, but the mechanics of exactly how this would be sorted out by the City Council.
And also, must the non-citizen parents or caregivers of children live in Oakland?
Ooh.
Yeah.
I don't know. So it's actually not just public schools. They have to go to school in Oakland?
Okay.
Don't know. We'll make a note of that one, yeah.
Another question. Why does the city council put a measure on the ballot if it's not a tax as opposed to just passing a law?
That's a great question, and I should have pointed that out. When we have to make a change to the Oakland City Charter, and I should have pointed that out. So all the measures that we're voting on make changes to the Oakland City Charter. That has to come to the voters. Just the city council can't do it by itself. Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? We have a question coming up. We have about 3 minutes. We will have you out of here by 8 o'clock. That's our goal.
And I may have missed this. On Measure W, the candidates can make a choice whether they want to participate in this type of funding or not.
Yes.
So it's left up to the candidate.
It's left up to the candidate, right,
Okay.
as to whether they participate in the voucher program or not.
Okay. And the ZUB tax, I had heard something recently that there are proposals for decreasing costs for Oakland residents to enter the zoo, if this passes, to enter the zoo or so many times a year. Do you know anything about that?
So I don't believe, so what I've heard again is, let me back up. So there is, to the best of my knowledge, there is nothing written into the measure to specify exactly, whether free programs or things like that. There might be intentions that are in a presentation, maybe. I have not heard free passes to everyone. I have heard intentions on free passes to maybe schools, low-income seniors, sort of specific categories, not for everyone. Not that I've heard of.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it might have been coming from the zoo saying they would offer a certain discount to Oakland. I sure
Don't know.
wasn't sure
Yeah.
where I heard that, but I had heard
Yeah.
something about it.
All right. And someone online wants to know if Berkeley issues are being considered tonight, and the answer is no. This is tonight is just for Oakland. But if you do go to the League of Women Voters page, you will get explanations, and I think you even have like 2-minute videos, all kinds of things for various different city measures for those who don't reside in Oakland.
That's right. Yeah.
All right, then. Anna, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much
No,
for
thank
going
you
through
for
all of
having
that. A quick reminder, if you didn't register but want follow-up information, just make sure that I have your contact information. We do have, in addition to all the resources tonight, some of our partner organization analyses and recommendations, including League of Women Voters Action Guide. Oakland Rising has some good information on their website. And Faith in Action East Bay has a great analysis of Oakland measures. All of these will be sent out. And now I would like to invite Peyton to come up and offer a few closing words from Faith in Action and then a final closing blessing.
Wonderful. Good evening to all of those who are joining us virtually and those who are here in attendance safely. I just want to again reiterate my gratitude and thanks to the women of the League of Women Voters for all of their work tirelessly educating the community and making sure that people have the power to be informed. With Faith in Action East Bay, we believe it is absolutely critical that an informed community is an empowered community. And what our strategy has been as far as community organizing goes, especially when it comes to civic engagement. Our strategy this year, as we are coming kind of out of a pandemic, though we are still in it, has certainly been to empower local communities and congregations and even different groups to be able to have the tools that they need necessary to make the impacts that they want to see at the local level. So our civic engagement strategy has largely revolved around these things that we call tiger teams, because this is the year of the tiger. So what our tiger teams are small individual groups, whether they're congregations or a group of 10 friends or so, that just want to make a difference. And they come and they all meet together on our Zoom platform, and they educate one another. They talk about the things that are important to each other. They do the research. And through that nexus, through that hub, is where they begin to generate actions. We believe that these small, different coordinated groups, if they each focus on what's important to them, what their own self-interest is, then they'll be able to move something very powerful. And that's what we've seen. Our tagline this year was educate, activate, and celebrate. And that was the phase that we've been doing, educating ourselves in our community, activating our loved ones and those around us, and celebrating the victories, and even just celebrating the fact that we are able to do this work together. For example, some of the things that we've been doing are creating content and videos around different measures and around different things that are important to us. Some things as simple as, why is it important for us to vote? Well, we had somebody who reflected about his grandparents that were involved in the civil rights movement. We have congregations that are seeking to do 100% voting congregations and are working to make sure that everyone in their congregation is registered and knows how to use the ballot and use it well. Some of the other things that we've been doing in the past are these candidate forums. We've put on 2 district attorney candidate forums. We've hosted an Alameda County Supervisors Forum that just happened last week. The AME Churches of Oakland also last week hosted an Oakland Mayoral Candidates Forum. And if you missed those, they're up on YouTube, but there's no need to worry because we have more candidates forums coming up. We have an Oakland Mayoral Forum that is going to be happening October 27th at 6 p.m. And if you need it's going to be hybrid over Zoom and also at St. Columba Church in Oakland. You can go to our Faith in Action East Bay website, and there you'll be able to find it. Click under events, and you'll see the flyer there. And the flyers are also outside. So this is the Oakland Mayoral Candidates Forum. All 10 candidates have stated that they were going to be there in person. That's again October 27th at 6 p.m., which is a Thursday. The second thing we want to lift up as well is our opportunity to meet the new sheriff-elect. This is going to be happening on October 25th at 6 p.m. via Zoom. And again, you can find all of those dates and Zoom links and all those things that we've grown to love throughout this time on our Faith in Action East Bay website. So with that, there's one other thing actually I do want to lift up, is the importance of Measure H. While Faith in Action East Bay hasn't done extensive work around other measures, Measure H is something that is very near, dear, and important to our leaders at Faith in Action East Bay. We believe in making sure that all of our students have the opportunities and the funding and the resources that is necessary for them to be able to be successful. And the proof is in what's been happening. So we do want to lift up Measure H for everyone. And now with that, I will move us towards our conclusion. I figured the best way to wrap us up this evening would be through somebody who I look up to a lot. My reasoning for being involved in the struggle for civic engagement and civil rights came after I took a trip down to the South when I was in high school and got to meet some very powerful people who were involved in the civil rights movement. Met people like Minnie Jean Brown Trakey and Elizabeth Eckford, who were 2 of the Little Rock Nine, the first to integrate Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas, who had to be escorted to their classes by soldiers. I met one of the cousins of Emmett Till, who was actually with Emmett in the shop the day that he had allegedly whistled at the white woman, and was sharing the same bed as Emmett the night that Emmett was taken away and brutally murdered and lynched. I met many other people when we went to Selma, Alabama. And usually on this trip, John Lewis comes. But this time, John Lewis was not able to join us, and it was always on my goals to meet him. But unfortunately, we know the late John Lewis has passed away, but we know his legacy lives on. One of the things that I did take away from that trip were his words in his book, Walking with the Wind. And so I believe it fitting, as we get ready to close this evening, with the words of John Lewis, as written by his book, as he concludes it. And for those who don't know, John Lewis was a congressman who represented the state of Georgia in the House. So John Lewis survived the Selma, Alabama, the march, the beatings there, and also was a freedom rider and was the lead organizer with SNCC. And what he says here, as he reflects on everything, is, when I look back on my own life and what I've come through, I can say that it was the prayers of true believers, the prayers of an involved community of similar minds, that made it possible for me to still be here. Sometimes when I look back at the film footage of that civil rights fight and see what happened to me at Selma or on the Freedom Rides, I have to believe that it was the prayers of the faithful that made it possible for some of us to still be here. From time to time, I feel the presence of that power, that force that I call the spirit of history. Sometimes you're guided by it, led by it. Other times you're in tune with that force and you can communicate with it. You have to be in tune, and you have to allow yourself to be used by this supreme being. That's what made me feel when we were at the height of the civil rights movement, whether it was the march from Selma to Montgomery or going on the Freedom Rides, that we were involved in something like a holy crusade. It was an extension of my religious convictions, of my faith. We would sing a song or say a prayer, and it was an affirmation that it was the right thing to do. At that time, we were communicating with a supreme being, with this force. Prayer is one of the most powerful, well, I don't want to call it a weapon, but it's a tool, an instrument, a way of reaching out that humankind has. We can and do use it to deal with the problems and the things and the issues that we don't understand, that we don't quite comprehend. It's very hard to separate the essence of prayer and faith. We pray because we believe that praying can make what we believe, our dreams and our visions, come true. And lastly, he concludes with an African proverb. There's an old African proverb that says, when you pray, move your feet. So with that, I urge you, in the wisdom of John Lewis, to however you connect to that supreme being, the creator, the essence, the force of history, that as you pray, you move your feet. Thank you.